Tell me if this has ever happened to you while playing Genshin Impact. Of course, if you don't have Diluc, then you couldn't have experienced this exact same scenario. The point I wanted to make was that I was trying to hit the Mirror Maiden with Diluc's burst, but he turns around and decides that it would be better used on this Electro system behind him instead. This is definitely not something that's unique to Diluc. This can happen with any targeted ability. Venti's burst is another one that I feel like is kind of notorious for this. So why does this happen? It all has to do with this little white arrow that's currently hovering over the Sisson Mage. This is Genshin Impact's target cursor. It tells you which enemy you're currently focusing on. All of your attacks and abilities will go in the direction of whichever enemy has the target cursor above them. This is not limited to ranged abilities and also applies to melee attacks and abilities as well. If we take a closer look at this clip, we can see that the target cursor is currently pointing to the Sisson Mage who is in front of us. But she happens to teleport behind Bennett just before I swap to Venti and fire off his burst. At this point, the target cursor is still on the Sisson Mage, so even though Venti's facing the Mirror Maiden, he actually turns around to hit the Sisson Mage instead. We can do a similar analysis for Diluc's case. This is one frame before he fires off his burst. It's a bit harder to see because of the floor chamber text, but you can see that the target cursor is locked onto the Electro system that's behind him. So even though I'm walking towards the Mirror Maiden, when I use Diluc's burst, he focuses the enemy that the target cursor is on, which is this Electro Sisson. So if you ever felt like your ranged abilities were going in random directions sometimes, this is why. There was most likely an enemy that was next to you or behind you that the target cursor locked onto just before you fired off your ability. Now of course this begs the question, can you change which enemy the target cursor points to? Unfortunately, there is currently no hotkey that forces the target cursor onto another enemy. This is actually a pretty common feature in a lot of open world RPGs where you can rotate the target cursor onto different enemies that are around you. Unfortunately in Genshin Impact, you can't manually force the target cursor onto a specific enemy like this. Instead, the target cursor automatically moves around based on your position relative to the enemies around you. In my experience, the target cursor will usually focus the enemy that's closest to you, while also giving some priority to the enemy that your character is facing. You can see here how the target cursor jumps from the Hydro Gunner to the Eremite as my Suko starts to dash to the left. My recommendation is not to worry too much about the mechanics of how the target cursor moves, and more so just be conscious of where it is at all times. Try your best to keep track of it, especially if you're about to use an important ranged ability, and make sure that it's in the direction that you expect it to be. This also means you should be deliberate about your positioning when you fight. If you are about to use an ability that does require some aiming, don't put yourself in a position where it's ambiguous which enemy it's going to go for. One thing I like to do when I really need to land a critical ability is to reposition myself so that all the enemies are lined up in front of me. This way, regardless of which enemy the target cursor locks onto, I can be assured that my ability will at least go in the general direction that I want it to. I hope that you learned something new. Maybe knowing about this target cursor can help you aim your abilities a little more consistently. This is all I have to share on this topic, and as always, thank you so much for watching.